After nearly a year of negotiations, India-US trade talks have entered a critical phase. The fall deadline for a deal has already passed, and now all eyes are on whether both sides can finalize a framework agreement by the end of this year. The deputy US trade representative is in India this week, a sign of how closely the deal is being watched, especially by Indian exporters with deep exposure to the US market. Remember, US has imposed 50% tariffs on India, higher than all other East Asian economies. This includes a 25% penalty tariff and a 25% reciprocal tariff. India is pushing for the removal of the penalty tariffs and reductions in reciprocal duties as well. But it isn't really putting all eggs in one basket. Alongside the US delegations, a high-level EU trade team led by none other than Trade Commissioner Maros Sefcovic is in Delhi meeting Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal. EU and India are also racing towards a deal by January ahead of a planned visit by the European Union President Ursula von der Leyen. Meanwhile, India just concluded a significant visit by Russian President Vladimir Putin. New trade deals, migration and mobility agreements were signed between the two nations, underscoring that this has been a year in which US pressure under Donald Trump has pushed India towards multifaceted diplomacy. According to James Crabtree and Luthra in their article, The India Trump Made, in the Foreign Affairs magazine, India spent the last decade deepening ties with the United States on investment, defense, cooperation and technology. But with Washington's aggressive tariff and foreign policy stance, this year, New Delhi appears to be returning to a multi-alignment strategy, balancing relationships with multiple global powers rather than betting on a single partner. Going forward, the US remains India's important partner, but a more unpredictable one that's pushing New Delhi to hedge its bets. Europe is now emerging as a strong alternative for technology, investment, security cooperation, especially amid shared concerns over China. In the end, Trump's pressure may have ironically accelerated India's shift towards a more balanced and diversified foreign policy approach. Now, this is what James Crabtree and Luthra are arguing in their article. To take this forward, I'm now joined by the author of the article himself, also a distinguished fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations and a columnist in the Foreign Affairs magazine, James Crabtree. James, thank you very much for being with us. India has always been multi-aligned, but Trump 2.0 and the kind of volatility we've seen in the India-US partnership this year, how do you think this is going to influence India's policy of multilateralism and multi-alignment?
Well, I think India has, for the last decade, 2 decades even, really tried to draw closer to the United States because the United States has a lot to offer. It offers you economic investment, technology, defense partnership. And so even earlier this year, India's Prime Minister and External Affairs Minister still thought that was the path they were likely to take. They thought they could manage Trump. And Trump, unfortunately, for India, just as with Europe, has proved to be very difficult to manage. And so now we're looking at Plan B. In a sense, you're not going to be able to get what you want from the United States because the United States is very difficult to deal with. It's still important, but who else can you deal with? And that means the Gulf countries, Asian democracies like Japan, Korea, maybe Russia, but also the Europeans. The Europeans are a good opportunity for India, and that's why Mr. Modi and Mr. Jaishankar have been spending a lot of time talking to European nations to try and build that deeper partnership.
You know, James, I'd like to ask you about the progress in the India-US negotiations. 2 US delegations will be in town this week. First, you have Alison Hooker, US Undersecretary of State, and then you've got the trade delegation led by Deputy USTR Rick Switzer. How hopeful are you of India and the US concluding a deal by the end of this year? And how would you read the room if we don't manage a deal by the end of 2025?
So I'm reasonably hopeful that a deal will get done, but I think the reality is that it isn't really a series of technical challenges that is holding this back. I mean, this is ultimately political. And if I'm being brutally frank about it, it is that President Trump would like India to give him more credit for what he perceives to have been his role back in bringing the conclusion to the India-Pakistan clashes. And so I don't think what's happening here is that they're negotiating over agricultural cars or pharmaceuticals. I mean, I think most of that negotiation has been done. I think now we're looking for a diplomatic way forward in which this disagreement between the two sides over how much credit Mr. Trump should be given is solved diplomatically. I'm optimistic that it will happen, but I think that's what's going on here.
Right. Now, that also brings us to the next question. United States, under the second Trump presidency, is particularly warming up to Pakistan. They do see Pakistan as an important strategic ally vis-a-vis taking any action against Iran in future, or maybe when it comes to stakes in Afghanistan for future as well. Not to forget Asim Munir, Shehbaz Sharif, the Pakistani Prime Minister, they've heaped a lot of praises on Donald Trump, nominated him for the Nobel Prize as well. The warming up between US, White House and Pakistan, is this temporary, or is there a more structural change in the US foreign policy thinking for the long term?
So I think initially people thought it was temporary. It was a bit of fast footwork in Islamabad, in which, as you say, a few crypto deals, clever nomination for the Peace Prize. But I think the longer it's gone on, the longer it seems to have a structural element to it. And in a sense, that's on both sides, that the US has looked again at Pakistan and what it can offer, both in terms of Pakistan, but also in Central Asia. And it's looked again at India. And in a sense, what's happening here is that the US used to have this policy towards India, which some called strategic altruism. Basically, whatever's good for India is good for us because we're both worried about China. And so we'll bend over backwards to be nice to India. And what's happened, I think, at the macro level is Trump has just decided he's not going to do that anymore. He's not into bending over backwards for anyone. He wants a reciprocal deal on his own terms, and he looks at the deal he's getting from India and he thinks he can get a better one. And so that's what the process is. So I think with Pakistan, it's a little bit, there's some bottom-up elements, but there is a structural shift going on as well.
Structural shift with Pakistan. Now, when you speak about a multi-alignment policy, you can have many relationships. You can try and play the world and work with many allies to secure your interests. But what would be that one relationship that would be perhaps the most consequential right now for the next few years? While we try and negotiate something with the US, the Trade Commissioner of European Union is also in India for talks, and he's holding talks as we speak.
Well, so as I say, I mean, in the article that I wrote with Rudra, we argued that the US will likely remain India's most important relationship, but it's a more complicated one. And if you're looking for a single other relationship which gives you a lot of what you got from the US, then the relationship with the Europeans is the best bet. And they offer investment, a trade deal, which will likely happen, concluding this week to be launched at the summit in January. Other agreements in areas like economic security, mutual concerns with China. So there's a complementarity between India and Europe. And Europe, although it's complicated as an entity, with lots of countries, and Brussels is at least a little bit more reliable and predictable than the United States is at the moment. So I don't think India is going to move from one to the other. Russia remains important, as you saw with President Putin last week. There are lots of other countries that India does business with, but I think doing more with Europe is a priority for Mr. Modi and his government.
Right. What more can India achieve from this partnership? For example, our labor-intensive exports, they have received quite a setback because of the US tariffs. Number two, we need to diversify our exports. We need to have stronger technology and AI partnerships. So do you feel the EU as a body, as a union of countries can meet India's economic growth goals? And will an FTA address all of that?
I think it can certainly help. So an FTA with the European Union is a big deal. The European Union is the world's largest trading bloc. And so that on itself is something that people have been trying to get for ages. Now, the FTA that we're going to sign is going to be a kind of mini FTA, not a maxi FTA, but still it's better than nothing. Then you have investment potential. Europe is rich continent, and it traditionally has underinvested in India, in part because it's invested a lot of money in China. It's now investing much less money in China, so there's money that could be invested in India if the investment conditions are right, and that's also something that has to change on the Indian side. And then there's a whole host of other areas. I mean, Europe is a good defense partner. France is already one of India's most important defense suppliers, and Europe is becoming much more orientated towards defense in the aftermath of Ukraine. So I think there are a host of areas where there is potential, and now there has to be political leadership and delivery to achieve that potential.
Right. Now, when it comes to China, now that is another aspect of the relationship that you have focused on. We have tried to restore some amount of stability in the India-China partnership. Both sides have started allowing visas. Border trade has resumed. Yet you have issues cropping up, like Chinese officials questioning an Indian citizen from Arunachal Pradesh, transiting from Shanghai. Then you also have China not releasing rare earth magnet consignments from India. India, at the same time, also relies heavily on Chinese imports. Now, that's a reality we can't wish away immediately. We need that for our export competitiveness. So, to what extent do you realistically believe that India will be able to stabilize the India-China partnership? Because at the end of the day, that rivalry will always remain.
I agree with you. I mean, I think the aim with China is to put a stable floor under the relationship and try and recover some of the ground that's been lost since the border clashes in 2020. And I think that's been reasonably successful. The border has been fairly stable. You're seeing on your screens now the pictures of Prime Minister Modi going to the Shanghai Cooperation Summit in Beijing recently. However, I think there's most likely to be quite a strong upper limit on what can be achieved in India-China cooperation. As you say, there's weaponization risk to India, accepting a lot more Chinese investment in areas like manufacturing or green technology, and therefore there's a difficult balance to be struck between growth and economic security. There's always the possibility that something else will go wrong in the relationship. There are lots of potential flashpoints on the border. There are lots of competition around countries and capitals in South Asia between India and China. So it looks like structural competition between India and China is the way that we're heading. And so probably the best that can be hoped for is a period of low-level stability in which the two sides aren't fighting with each other too much.
Right. When it comes to artificial intelligence, and this is an issue that we'll see develop over the next few months, there is an India AI Action Summit that is being hosted in New Delhi. Do you think, irrespective of what happens between US and India on the trade front, US companies will be bullish on investing in India for AI collaboration for the future?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think that's an area where the US has huge advantages over Europe or anywhere else. India won't accept Chinese AI companies because of the potential problems that comes with that. Europe doesn't really have any big AI companies, and therefore the US is your best bet. And the US tech companies, not just the hyperscalers, Google, Amazon, but also the new generation of AI companies like Anthropic and OpenAI, are all very focused on the Indian market. And India, unlike China, has over recent decades been very open to international technology flows. And so I think when you have the AI Action Summit in New Delhi in mid-February next year, you'll see a lot of attention from American tech companies, and that will particularly be going not just into AI models, but into the building of data centers, where you've seen a lot of deals recently with some of the Indian large corporate houses, with Adani, with Reliance, and others getting into this space of partnering to build large data centers in India as the next stage of India's technology growth.
And finally, what do you think will be the best foreign policy playbook for India to also address its economic concerns and deliver long-term growth for its people?
Well, I think the argument we were making in the article is that, India could look at China, but that comes with a lot of strings attached. It could look at Russia, as it did last week, and Russia has some things to offer, but Russia is a diminishing asset in many ways. It's less useful than it used to be militarily in particular. And therefore, India, as it looks to diversify away from the United States, is going to look around the world and see, well, who are the best partners that you can get? And there are a lot of them. South Korea, Australia, the Gulf countries, all of these are good partners, but that Europe is a big opportunity that should be taken. And so I think you'll see that moving forward in January when you have the big EU-India summit and the visit of President von der Leyen.
All right. Thank you so much, James Crabtree, for joining us to speak about your article on how Donald Trump's bullying is actually pushing India towards greater multi-alignment. Let's see how things pan out this week. It's a crucial week for both the India-US trade agreement and the India-EU trade deal as well. We're going